"You there? What are you doing near that plane?" The voice boomed across the empty hangar like a sudden crack of thunder. Marcus, a 12-year-old boy with wide, curious eyes, froze in place. His small hands clutched a sketchbook and pencil, his fingers smudged with graphite from the careful lines he had been drawing. He hadn't expected to be shouted at. He hadn't expected to be treated like he didn't belong. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind of day when the world feels endless and full of possibility. Marcus loved airplanes more than anything else in the world. While most kids his age were obsessed with video games or sports, Marcus spent his weekends drawing jets, reading about famous pilots and dreaming of the day he would soar through the skies himself. His father often took him to small airports to watch the planes take off and land. To Marcus, it was magical, a glimpse into the life he wanted so badly. But to Captain Reynolds, the pilot who had just shouted at him, Marcus didn't look like a dreamer. He looked suspicious. The boy's presence near the sleek private aircraft felt wrong to him. Instead of noticing the sketchbook or the childlike wonder in Marcus's eyes, Reynolds saw only a stranger too close to something valuable. His mind leapt instantly to the worst conclusions: vandalism, theft, trespassing. "Kids like this shouldn't be here," he muttered under his breath as he reached for his phone. Marcus's heart began to pound. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but the intensity in Reynolds's voice made him feel as though he had been caught stealing. "I'm not touching the plane," Marcus stammered, holding up his sketchbook as if it were evidence of his innocence. "I was just drawing. I really like planes. My dad is picking me up soon." But Reynolds wasn't listening. He waved his hand dismissively, eyes narrowing. "That's what they all say. I'm not taking any chances." He dialed the police. Without another word, his tone sharp as he reported, "Suspicious minor near aircraft. Possible tampering. Send someone immediately." Marcus's stomach dropped. Police? For drawing? The boy's young mind couldn't process how something so innocent had spiraled into something so serious. He stood frozen, staring at the man who had just turned his passion into a crime. For Marcus, airplanes represented freedom, exploration, and hope. Now, standing there under the pilot's harsh gaze, they suddenly felt like walls closing in on him. Every second stretched painfully long. The faint hum of engines in the distance mixed with the pilot's muttering. Marcus felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning with the pressure of tears he didn't want to show. He thought of his father, who had always told him to stand tall, to never be ashamed of his love for aviation, to remember that dreams belong to anyone willing to chase them. But in this moment, Marcus felt small, powerless, and trapped in a place where even his dreams seemed unwelcome. And then came the sound that made his chest seize up, the wail of police sirens. They started faint at first, then grew louder, echoing off the hangar walls like a warning. Red and blue lights flashed across the concrete, painting the planes in alarming shades. Marcus's body tensed as fear took over. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but he also knew how quickly things could go bad when people assumed the worst. His father had warned him about moments like this, about how sometimes the world would see him not for who he was, but for what they imagined him to be. Captain Reynolds stood taller now, almost proud of himself for taking quick action. He didn't see a frightened child clutching a notebook. He saw confirmation of his own vigilance. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered, watching the flashing lights draw closer. In his mind, he was preventing disaster. In reality, he was, dragging an innocent boy into one. Marcus wanted to run, but his legs felt glued to the ground. He wanted to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. All he could do was look at the sketch he had been working on, now lying on the ground where he had dropped it in shock. The pencil marks showed the outline of the very plane Reynolds was so desperate to protect, a drawing that symbolized Marcus's admiration, now twisted into something dangerous in the eyes of a man who had already made up his mind. The sirens cut off abruptly as 2 police cars rolled to a stop. Doors slammed, heavy boots pounded the pavement, and officers moved swiftly toward Marcus. Their hands hovered near their holsters, eyes scanning the boy as if he were a threat. Marcus swallowed hard. his small body trembling. This wasn't how his Saturday was supposed to go. He came to dream, to sketch, to imagine flying high above the clouds. Instead, he was about to face police officers who believed he was a criminal. In that moment, Marcus silently wished his father would arrive, wished someone would see him for who he really was, a child chasing a dream, not a suspect in a crime. But all he could do now was stand still, as the weight of suspicion pressed down on him harder than gravity itself. The piercing sirens grew louder until they were right outside the hangar, and Marcus felt his stomach twist into knots. 2 police. Cars screeched to a stop, and the flashing lights bathed the entire area in red and blue, making it feel less like a quiet airport and more like the scene of a crime. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still clutching his sketchbook against his chest, though his grip was weak, as if he could barely hold on to it anymore. The doors of the cruisers opened with a metallic thud, and 2 officers stepped out quickly, their boots striking the concrete with heavy, deliberate steps. Their eyes locked onto Marcus, and even though he was only 12 years old, their expressions showed no softness, no recognition that this was just a boy. One of them barked a command in a voice sharp enough to make Marcus flinch. "Step away from the aircraft. Hands where we can see them." The boy's knees nearly buckled. His sketchbook slipped from his sweaty hands, landing on the ground with a soft thud, the pages fluttering open to the pencil drawings inside. I didn't do anything," Marcus stammered, raising his trembling hands in the air just like the officer ordered. His voice cracked with fear. "I was just drawing. Please, I didn't touch the plane." The taller officer's eyes narrowed, as he glanced at the book on the ground but didn't bend down to look. "Stay still," he ordered again. The other officer moved closer, his hand resting near his holster, his expression unreadable. From behind them, Captain Reynolds walked, up with a self-assured stride. He looked at the officers with a nod, as if handing over responsibility for the situation he had set in motion. "That's him," Reynolds said firmly. "I caught him loitering near the aircraft. He was too close, acting suspicious. Could have been tampering or worse. I didn't take any chances." Marcus's mouth went dry. Loitering, tampering. The word sounded heavy, dangerous, nothing like the truth of what he was doing. He felt small under their stares, every beat of his heart thudding loudly in his ears. He wanted to shout that it was unfair, that he was only sketching, but the sight of their hands near their weapons kept his words trapped in his throat. The officers exchanged glances. One of them muttered, "Good call bringing us in." The other nodded slightly as if the pilot's word was all they needed to assume Marcus was guilty. Their skepticism, their readiness to believe the worst, pressed down on Marcus like a weight. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Marcus's breathing grew shallow and the air felt too thick, too heavy. He tried to steady himself, tried to remember his father's words. Keep calm. Don't make sudden moves. Stay respectful, no matter what. But how could he feel calm when the world around him was exploding with suspicion and danger? Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, the deep rumble of another engine rolled into the parking lot. A sleek black SUV pulled up quickly, its tires crunching against the gravel. The police officers turned their heads, slightly distracted by the arrival. The vehicle's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a crisp navy suit, his presence commanding the space instantly. His stride was firm, his eyes sharp, and his jaw set with quiet authority. "Marcus," the man called out, his voice cutting through the tense air. Marcus's heart leapt. He recognized it instantly. Relief washed over him like a wave. His dad was here. The officers paused, their earlier confidence faltering just slightly as they looked at the man approaching. Something in his demeanor, the calm authority in his movements, made them hesitate. He wasn't just another parent, storming onto the scene. He carried himself like someone who belonged in charge. Anthony Walker, Marcus's father, strode directly to his son's side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He looked first at Marcus, making sure his boy was safe, then slowly turned his gaze to the officers and the pilot. His expression was controlled, but there was no mistaking the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "What?" he asked in a steady, low voice, is going on here? For the first time since the sirens arrived, silence fell. The officers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less sure of themselves. Captain Reynolds, however, stepped forward with confidence, certain that he was still in the right. This boy was loitering near the planes, Reynolds explained. I suspected he might be up to something dangerous. I called the police right away. Anthony's eyes narrowed, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Loitering? He's 12. He was sketching. Did you even ask him before calling the police? Did you even give him a chance to speak? Reynolds blinked, caught off guard by the precision of the question, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Look, sir, we can't just have anyone hanging around near the aircraft. Security comes first. I was just doing my job. Anthony didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The weight of his authority carried in every measured word. What you did was jump to conclusions and put a child in danger because of your assumptions. My son is not a threat. He is not a criminal. He is a boy who loves airplanes, a boy who was dreaming of the sky while you turned him into a suspect. The officers glanced at each other again, the shift in the atmosphere now unmistakable. One of them leaned toward the other, whispering, "That's Walker, Anthony Walker, the FAA Administrator." The words hit like a shockwave. Suddenly, the dynamic changed. The officers stood straighter, their tones softened, and Captain Reynolds' confident posture faltered. In an instant, the man who had been so certain of himself only minutes before realized he had made a very big mistake. Anthony Walker's presence shifted the entire atmosphere in the hangar. He stood tall, his hand resting firmly on Marcus's shoulder, steadying his son, who was still trembling under the weight of everything that had just happened. Marcus looked up at his father with wide, tear-brimmed eyes, the fear slowly giving way to relief now that the one person he trusted most had arrived. Anthony's gaze swept over the two officers, then locked on Captain Reynolds. His voice came low and controlled, but every word carried the weight of authority. Explain to me exactly why my 12-year-old son is surrounded by police officers with their hands near their guns. The taller officer cleared his throat nervously. Sir, we received a call about a suspicious individual near the planes. When we arrived, this young man, he hesitated, glancing at Marcus's small frame, the sketchbook lying open on the ground, its pages fluttering in the breeze. The words he had prepared suddenly felt hollow. Well, we followed protocol. Protocol? Anthony repeated, his tone sharper now. Your protocol is to point weapons at a child with a pencil and a notebook? Your protocol is to escalate before you investigate? The officers shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. But Captain Reynolds, determined to justify his actions, stepped forward. Mr. Walker, is it? Look, I'm just doing my job. I can't risk someone damaging or interfering with an aircraft. He was too close. I had no idea who he was, and I wasn't about to take chances. I called the police for safety. Anthony's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, his calm demeanor cracked enough for the frustration to show. Safety? He pointed toward Marcus, whose small hands were still trembling. Does this look like safety to you? You didn't see a boy sketching a plane, you saw a threat. You didn't use judgment. You used fear, and because of that, you put my son in danger. Reynolds stiffened, folding his arms defensively. With all due respect, sir, I was protecting the aircraft. You can't expect me to just assume every stranger has good intentions. Anthony stepped closer, his voice dropping to a level that made every word cut deep. And you can't assume every black child has bad intentions. That's exactly what you did. My son is not a stranger to aviation. He's grown up around airports, he loves planes. And instead of encouraging that passion, you turned it into suspicion. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the men. He wanted to speak up, to tell them again that he was only drawing, but he stayed quiet, letting his father's words protect him. The officers, now realizing the gravity of the situation, exchanged worried glances. One of them finally recognized Anthony fully. Sir, forgive me, but aren't you Anthony Walker, the FAA Regional Administrator? The title landed like a thunderclap. Reynolds blinked rapidly, his face paling. The authority in Anthony's voice suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't just an angry parent. This was a man who oversaw aviation safety for the region, a man who had the power to review pilot conduct, security procedures, and disciplinary actions. "Yes, Anthony," replied firmly, "I am, and believe me, I understand better than anyone the importance of safety and vigilance in aviation. But there's a difference between vigilance and bias. There's a difference between securing an aircraft and criminalizing a child for existing near it." Reynolds opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He had been so certain, so sure of his duty. But now the reality of who he had called the police on, and why, hit him harder than he expected. Anthony turned to Marcus, kneeling so that his eyes met his son's. His tone softened, his anger momentarily giving way to compassion. "You're okay, son. You did nothing wrong. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." He placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's cheek, wiping away a tear. "You were dreaming. You were chasing your passion. That's not a crime and never will be." Marcus nodded faintly, his chest loosening just enough to take a deep breath. The reassurance from his father felt like a shield, strong enough to push back against the fear still lingering inside him. Then Anthony rose again, towering over the scene, his voice regaining its sharp edge as he faced the pilot and officers once more. "Do you understand how easily this could have gone wrong? One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and my son could have been harmed, over nothing. All because of a judgment you made in seconds without ever asking a single question." The silence that followed was heavy. The officers looked down, embarrassed, while Reynolds's face flushed with shame and stubbornness. He finally muttered, I didn't mean for it to go this far." "But it did," Anthony replied without hesitation. "And that's the problem. You don't measure responsibility by what you intended. You measure it by what you did. And today you endangered a boy who loves aviation more than anyone I know." Reynolds's eyes flickered to Marcus, then back to Anthony. His throat tightened. For the first time he began to realize this moment would follow him, that his decision had not only humiliated him, but had exposed something deeper about the way he saw the world. Marcus bent down and picked up his sketchbook, brushing off the dirt. The drawing of the plane, once a source of joy, now carried the weight of the morning's ordeal. But in his heart, as shaken as he was, the dream of flying still burned. His father's words had ensured that, and as Anthony kept his protective hand on his son's shoulder, one thing was clear: this confrontation was far from over. The color drained from Captain Reynolds's face the moment the realization hit him. His earlier certainty, the smug confidence that he had done the right thing, melted away in seconds. He had called the police on a boy who turned out to be the son of one of the highest-ranking FAA officials in the region. And worse, he knew that no title or position could erase the ugly truth of why he had acted the way he did. "Sir, I didn't know," Reynolds stammered, his voice no longer sharp or commanding. "If I had realized who you were, if I had known who your son was..." Anthony cut him off instantly, his tone cold and firm. "Stop right there. Don't insult us by saying this would have been different if you had known who I was. My position doesn't change the fact that you saw a black child and assumed the worst. This has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the way you treated my son." The officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the imbalance in the situation. Now, they had come in with authority, ready to enforce whatever the pilot claimed, but Anthony's words exposed them too. They had believed the accusation without hesitation, without even checking what the boy had been doing. Reynolds tried again, his voice cracking. "I meant no harm. I was only trying to protect the aircraft. That's all. Security is my responsibility." "And I thought..." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "You thought wrong. Let me ask you something, Captain. If you had seen another child here, maybe one who didn't look like Marcus, would you have reacted the same way? Would you have jumped to calling the police without so much as a question?" Reynolds opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence that followed spoke louder than any excuse he could have offered. Anthony stepped closer, his presence commanding, his voice rising now, no longer holding back the edge of anger he had kept contained for Marcus's sake. "Do you understand how dangerous your so-called precaution was? Police officers arrived here ready to treat my son as a criminal. He could have been handcuffed. He could have been thrown to the ground. He could have been hurt, or worse. All because you couldn't take 2 seconds to see a boy holding a notebook instead of a weapon." Marcus stood quietly by his father's side, his small frame trembling slightly, but his eyes now fixed on Reynolds. There was something powerful in hearing his father speak with such certainty, standing up for him in a way that left no room for argument. It gave Marcus a sense of strength he hadn't felt when the sirens first wailed. Reynolds' shoulders slumped as the weight of Anthony's words pressed down on him. The truth was undeniable. He had let his assumptions lead him, and now the consequences were laid bare. "I suppose I should have asked him first," Reynolds muttered weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Suppose?" Anthony's response came fast and sharp. "In aviation, suppose is not good enough. Suppose can cost lives. Suppose can cause disasters. You wouldn't sign off on a plane's safety because you suppose it's fine. You inspect, you confirm, you verify. Why was my son not worth the same careful judgment? Why was he treated as guilty before you knew a single fact?" The officers looked down, shame flickering across their faces. One of them finally spoke, his voice quiet. "We apologized to the boy. We didn't mean to frighten him." Anthony turned to them, his expression still hard. "Apologies are words. What matters is what you do the next time. The next time you arrive at a scene like this, you had better remember today. You had better remember that children deserve protection, not suspicion. And you, Captain." He turned his focus back to Reynolds, his voice lowering but carrying even more weight. "You had better remember that authority is not about power. It's about responsibility. You failed that responsibility today." Reynolds swallowed hard, his throat dry. His pride, his confidence, all of it was stripped away, leaving only guilt and regret. He nodded slowly, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "You're right," he admitted. "I was wrong. I judged without thinking. I'll never forget this." But even as he said it, he knew the words sounded hollow. The image of Marcus standing there, hands trembling in the air like a criminal, would haunt him. Anthony placed a protective arm around his son, steadying him, reminding him that he was safe now. "Come on, Marcus," he said gently, guiding him toward their SUV. But before leaving, he looked back one last time at the pilot and officers. "You should all think long and hard about what happened here, because while you go home and move on, my son will carry the memory of being treated like a threat when all he wanted to do was dream." The hangar fell silent as Anthony and Marcus walked away. The officers said nothing, and Reynolds remained, rooted to the spot, his mind racing, his heart heavy with the realization of what his actions had caused. For the first time in his career, he understood that regret isn't just about mistakes. It's about facing the truth of who you really are when those mistakes are made. The silence after Anthony's final words hung heavy in the hangar. "Yep, Tent." Reynolds stayed frozen in place, staring at the boy and his father as they walked away, his mind churning with regret. But for Marcus, that silence was something else entirely. It was the space where his fear began to loosen, where the sound of his father's steady voice echoed louder than the shouts and sirens that had filled the morning. Anthony guided Marcus toward the black SUV, his arm wrapped protectively around his son's shoulders. Every step they took away from the hangar felt like a step back toward safety. Marcus clutched his sketchbook tightly, as if holding onto it meant holding onto the dream that someone had tried to strip from him. The boy looked up at his father, his eyes still wide and unsettled. "Dad, why did he think I was doing something wrong?" His voice was small, but the question cut deep. Anthony stopped, crouching down so that his eyes were level with his son's. He placed both hands gently on Marcus's shoulders. "Because sometimes people don't see you for who you are. They see you through their own fears, their own biases, and their own ignorance. But you have to remember something, son. What they see does not define you. Who you are, what you dream, what you work for. That's what matters. Marcus bit his lip, glancing back at the hangar where the pilot and officers still lingered in the distance. It didn't feel fair. I wasn't doing anything wrong. No, you weren't, Anthony said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. And it wasn't fair. Life isn't always fair, Marcus. But you can't let someone else's mistake steal your dream. You love flying, don't you? Marcus nodded quickly. More than anything. Then you hold on to that. The sky belongs to you just as much as it belongs to anyone else. Don't let one man's judgment make you think otherwise. You'll get there. You'll fly someday. And when you do, you'll prove to the world that your place was always in the air. Marcus's lips curved into the faintest smile, fragile but real. His father's words planted something in him, something stronger than the fear he had felt minutes before. The dream that had felt so shaky was now steady again, grounded by the belief his father had in him. As they climbed into the SUV, Anthony glanced once more at the hangar. The pilot stood there, shoulders hunched, his face pale with shame. The officers were already retreating, their earlier bravado gone. It was clear the moment would haunt them, but Anthony didn't linger on it. His focus was on Marcus, on ensuring his son left the airport not broken but stronger. The drive home was quiet at first. Marcus leaned against the window, sketchbook in his lap, staring at the clouds drifting across the blue sky. His father glanced at him through the rearview mirror, giving him space but staying close enough that Marcus knew he wasn't alone. After a while, Anthony broke the silence. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Marcus?" Marcus turned his head slightly curious. "What?" "I see a future pilot. I see someone who's going to work hard, study hard, and one day sit in the cockpit of a plane with the same confidence I see in you when you're sketching. That's who you are. That's who you'll always be." The boy's smile grew wider, the fear now fully giving way to determination. "Really?" "Really," Anthony said with a nod. "And one day maybe you'll be the one teaching others what it means to dream without limits. Because the truth is, the sky isn't owned by anyone. It's open to those who dare to reach for it." Marcus looked back up at the clouds, his imagination already soaring beyond them. He pictured himself in a pilot's seat, guiding an aircraft through the vast blue, not held back by suspicion or fear, but propelled by his passion. Meanwhile, back at the hangar, Captain Reynolds couldn't shake the image of the boy standing there with his hands raised, frightened by the police he had summoned. The shame gnawed at him. He realized that for all his years of flying, for all his training about responsibility and judgment, he had failed the most basic test, recognizing the humanity in front of him. That day would stay with him, not as a moment of vigilance, but as a scar of regret. But for Marcus, the day would mean something different. It would be the moment he'd learned that even when the world doubts you, your dreams don't have to die. With his father's words echoing in his heart, he chose not to let fear define him. He chose to hold on to his dream. And as the SUV disappeared, down the road, Marcus lifted his sketchbook again, pressing his pencil to the page. The lines of a new airplane took shape beneath his hand. The dream wasn't broken. It was alive, stronger than ever, ready to take flight.